untouchable. It's not talent, it's not luck, it's not intelligence. It is the moment someone looks at themselves without pretense and decides, I will no longer be defined by how others treat me or by the patterns that have kept me small. That moment is raw, uncomfortable, and often lonely. Yet it is precisely where true power begins. The Stoics taught that the obstacle itself is the path, and the only thing fully within our control is the strength of our mind, the clarity of our judgment, and the way we carry ourselves through adversity. In that stillness, in that reckoning, freedom emerges, not as comfort, but as the ability to rebuild with intention. Most people run from collapse, from uncertainty, from the discomfort that exposes them. But those who grow understand that every failure, every slight, every betrayal is a form of data, a mirror reflecting exactly where change is required. It is not about reacting, but about observing, learning, and shaping a version of yourself that cannot be manipulated or undermined. Every moment of unease is an opportunity to practice mastery over your mind, your actions, and your responses. By engaging fully with it, you transform life from something dictated by circumstance into something guided by deliberate purpose. The raw moments of loss and exposure are not punishments, they are revelations. The patterns once invisible beneath habit and expectation become clear. Weaknesses, blind spots, and gaps in judgment are revealed, offering the intelligence necessary to rebuild yourself deliberately. The mind, when fully present in these moments, begins to perceive what was always there, but unseen. Insight arises not from comfort, but from disciplined attention. What once threatened to limit you now becomes the foundation upon which strength, clarity, and resilience are built. When everything you thought was solid collapses, when those you relied on reveal cracks you never noticed, and when plans you trusted dissolve, the world strips you bare. There is a quiet, unforgiving moment when all the structures you built and the assumptions you carried fall away, leaving you with nothing but truth. Most see this as tragedy, a failure to mourn, but the Stoics view it differently. Every loss, every betrayal, every unforeseen turn is revelation. It signals that the foundations you trusted were never as stable as you believed. When assumptions vanish, so does the false comfort of certainty. What remains is clarity, a lens through which reality is seen unadorned and without compromise. In that stillness, the mind is free from distraction and pretense. Patterns, once hidden beneath the noise of habit and expectation, become visible, carrying the intelligence you will need to rebuild deliberately and wisely. Collapse does not define the moment, your attention does. To observe the unraveling of your world without fleeing into denial or distraction is to engage with it fully. Stoicism teaches that the mind must remain calm, observing events without surrendering to impulse, measuring each detail with precision. In such moments, even pain becomes a teacher. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every violation of expectation is data. Subtle cues reveal weaknesses in relationships, gaps in judgment, and patterns of misplaced trust. Most people flee, seeking distraction or comfort. Those who stay, who examine the wreckage patiently, uncover insights that remain hidden to others. The difference is not in what occurs, but in the attention, discipline, and presence you bring to it. Each observation becomes a tool. Each insight becomes a guide for action. This engagement is not passive reflection, but deliberate cultivation of self-knowledge. The mind begins to recognize where old patterns misdirected energy, where habitual responses undermined opportunity, and where judgment deferred led to vulnerability. Emotional triggers, previously invisible, now reveal themselves. By noting them without reaction, you convert previous weaknesses into strategic insight. The mind, trained in this discipline, transforms what was once a source of collapse into material for reconstruction. Every lapse, every misjudgment, every error of expectation is now a lesson in cause and effect. Nothing is wasted. Pain and loss cease to be purely destructive. They are raw data informing the architecture of a stronger, clearer, and more deliberate self. Presence and calm become tools of influence. By withdrawing from distraction, selectively engaging with others, and holding measured responses, unpredictability becomes leverage. People begin to reveal themselves in response to your restraint, exposing patterns and weaknesses they cannot hide. Silence, once feared, becomes a demonstration of strength. Your mind can act without interference from habitual impulses or external pressure. Energy is preserved. Judgment is sharpened. Authority emerges quietly but unmistakably, not through performance, but through consistent alignment between thought, action, and observation. In this way, collapse is not defeat. It is the clearing of a field, the moment in which the foundation of the self can be rebuilt with intention, precision, and deliberate control. And as you reconstruct, you begin to project that internal strength outward. Posture, timing, presence, and measured speech communicate authority without explanation. Mystery becomes armor. People respect what they cannot fully predict. The Stoics teach that virtue shines through action, not announcement. Your calm, selective responses, the way you engage challenges with clarity, and the steadiness of your presence convey power far more than words ever could. Consistency and restraint cultivate influence naturally. The reconstructed self does not require validation. It requires only alignment. Others adjust, consciously or unconsciously, to the precision and control your presence signals. Influence and authority become natural byproducts of disciplined, deliberate engagement with the world. The process never ends. Growth is direction, not a destination. Complacency invites collapse, and evolution becomes both shield and demonstration. Each challenge, each test, each encounter is material for reflection, insight, and refinement. Emotional control converts former vulnerabilities into leverage, turning every provocation into an opportunity to act with awareness rather than habit. Observation, patience, and disciplined presence become the mechanisms by which resilience and influence are sustained. Each return, each step forward, is quiet but undeniable. The mind, trained in stoic clarity, ensures that no betrayal, no failure, no pressure from circumstance can define the limits of what you can achieve. Strength emerges in alignment, not spectacle. Engaging with these reflections is a choice toward deliberate growth and clarity. If you want to continue building that presence, strengthening your judgment and honing your mind, subscribing here is more than a simple action. It is a commitment to yourself. Each video, each insight, becomes a tool for understanding your own patterns, observing the world with clarity, and cultivating resilience. In the aftermath, it is not the moment of falling that confers power, but the decision to remain present within it. To engage with collapse is to practice the discipline of observation under pressure, to exercise the Stoic principle that perception shapes reality, and that clarity requires both patience and restraint. The patterns you notice are not merely abstract. They reveal practical truths about how trust is given, how attention is allocated, and how influence is exerted and received. These truths, once understood, inform every subsequent choice, creating a framework in which reconstruction is guided by intelligence rather than hope, by reflection rather than impulse. Every relationship can be reassessed, every habit measured against its contribution to clarity and stability, every expectation reconsidered in light of what reality has revealed. Remaining present in collapse also cultivates resilience. There is a subtle power in observing what once frightened or overwhelmed without the urgency of reaction. The Stoics teach that external events do not harm the mind unless the mind consents. By cultivating a calm awareness during these moments, you discover the capacity to endure, to witness, and to learn simultaneously. The rawness of loss becomes a field in which the seeds of disciplined action, strategic planning, and deliberate reconstruction can grow. Pain is transformed into insight. Betrayal becomes a mirror, reflecting the edges of influence and vulnerability. And when the mind consistently applies this lens, collapse ceases to be merely destructive. It becomes an essential, instructive component of growth, a force that guides rather than confines, that educates rather than punishes, and that clarifies rather than obscures. Ultimately, the intelligence embedded in every collapse is not revealed through avoidance, denial, or quick recovery. It emerges through sustained attention, reflection, and disciplined observation. Each pattern, each failure, each betrayal, and each miscalculation is data. Data that, when assimilated, informs the construction of a self that is deliberate, measured, and guided by insight rather than habit. Collapse is not the end, but the clearing of a field, and it is in the precise study of that clearing that the mind discovers the tools for reconstruction. The choice lies not in whether collapse occurs, it will, but in how it is approached, absorbed, and used. To sit quietly, to observe without yielding to immediate reaction, to notice patterns and derive their meaning, is to wield the greatest form of power available to anyone, the disciplined intelligence of the mind responding consciously to reality. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. It is here, in this careful attention to the aftermath of loss, that the foundations for a reconstructed, unshakable self are laid, and it is from this ground that deliberate strength, clarity, and strategic presence can grow. Your old identity, the one shaped by the quiet compulsion to be liked, to avoid confrontation, to accommodate the comfort of others, is no longer relevant. It was built carefully over years of navigating expectations, of softening edges so as not to provoke, of performing in ways that kept others comfortable while your own presence was subdued. In the world you inhabit now, one defined less by survival and more by intentional agency, that identity serves only to limit the structures it relied upon, the approval of peers, the avoidance of discomfort, the habitual reactions to challenge, were never foundations for strength. They were scaffolding for endurance, and scaffolding, while useful for construction, does not sustain itself once the building changes shape. To rebuild from within, to live deliberately, the first step is to acknowledge that these old patterns, though familiar, are obsolete. They are not broken. They are insufficient. The cracks are not in the actions you took, but in the structure that underpinned them, and any attempt to layer new goals atop these foundations will inevitably fracture. When you begin this work, it is vital to consider the distinction between external appearance and internal reality. The Stoics teach that virtue and strength exist internally, cultivated by conscious choice, rather than measured by social affirmation or outward performance. Who you are at the core is what shapes your decisions, your endurance, and the quality of every relationship you form. Every attachment, every habit, every impulse carries with it consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate. By performing a version of yourself designed to be acceptable, convenient, or readable by others, you surrender a degree of agency. That surrender is subtle, but cumulative. Over time, it establishes habits, expectations, and patterns that constrain your ability to act decisively and live according to principles rather than reaction. Recognizing the limitations of your prior self is not condemnation, it is observation. It is a stoic awareness that the world changes, and what once worked to sustain life may now fail to elevate it. Intentional reconstruction begins with the deliberate cessation of patterns that no longer serve. Small concessions, minor allowances, repeated for years, form the architecture of limitation. The tendency to over-explain, to justify, to seek validation, the patterns that kept the old self acceptable to others, these are the elements that require conscious interruption. In their place, new behaviors must be cultivated with precision and awareness. This is not an exercise in performative transformation, but in structural redesign. Every decision, every interaction, and every boundary is chosen with purpose. Habits that once felt harmless are assessed for their contribution to clarity, influence, and energy. Relationships are re-evaluated not on the comfort they provide, but on the alignment they sustain with the person you intend to become. Each aspect of existence, once habitual and passive, is now subject to deliberate scrutiny. The process requires a disciplined awareness of attachment and influence. Many old identities are preserved by the inertia of familiarity, the subtle force of others' expectations, and the unexamined comfort of habitual roles. Breaking free demands deliberate action, a conscious refusal to perform the behaviors that merely satisfied external observers. It is not cruelty to disengage from these patterns, but an act of precision, an alignment of action with internal purpose. Boundaries that were once porous must now be deliberate. Attention, which was once scattered to accommodate expectation, is now reserved for cultivation of skill, insight, and strategic presence. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to exercise choice rather than reflex, to cultivate strength rather than simply avoid discomfort. In this way, the internal architecture shifts, and the external behaviors become reflections of intention rather than habit. Burning the blueprint of the old self is both literal and metaphorical. It requires rejecting familiar comforts, letting go of relationships that persist only because the old identity demanded them, and ceasing to react in ways that were predictable to others. The old self was defined by patterns of concession, avoidance, and reactive engagement. The new self is defined by deliberate response, aligned purpose, and awareness of internal states. Each choice not to re-engage old behaviors is a brick removed from the foundation of the prior structure, and each choice to act with intention is a brick laid for the new. In Stoic practice, this is not a dramatic reinvention, but a meticulous reordering, a conscious calibration of what is within your control and how it is expressed. Every decision is measured, every reaction observed, and every pattern questioned. As you reconstruct, the subtlety of transformation is essential. The mind must not be coerced into sudden extremes, but guided into consistent alignment with principle. Abrupt gestures of change are noticeable and unstable. Deliberate, repeated, and controlled actions form the architecture of enduring influence. This requires reflection on the habits of thought that defined the prior self, the cognitive and emotional patterns that shaped responses, and the triggers that directed behavior unconsciously. By cultivating awareness in these areas, the mind gains the tools to reshape behavior not superficially, but structurally. The former identity dissolves not through force, but through sustained conscious engagement with what is intentional, aligned, and principled. Internal reconstruction inevitably shifts perception and influence. When the old patterns are removed, behaviors once dictated by habit or expectation are replaced by those informed by clarity and strategy. Others respond differently, not because of manipulation, but because the resonance of consistent, deliberate action signals competence, control, and unshakable presence. In this way, influence emerges naturally, without need for declaration or performance. Relationships recalibrate according to the reality of presence, rather than assumption or comfort. Decisions, once reactive, become intentional, informed by observation and reason rather than impulse. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. This shift is the measure of true internal transformation. It is not seen in dramatic acts, but in consistent alignment between thought, action, and principle. The final measure of this work is the sustainability of transformation. It is insufficient to create a temporary approximation of a stronger self. Strength, clarity, and strategic presence are cultivated through repetition, observation, and disciplined attention to internal states and external behaviors. The old identity's habits may linger subtly. Attention must remain vigilant to detect and correct deviations. The Stoics emphasize the continual practice of virtue and reason, and the same principle applies here. Rebuilding the self is an ongoing process, a daily exercise in observation, reflection, and alignment. Every action, every choice, every moment of presence contributes to the structure being rebuilt. This is not a performance for others, nor an experiment in convenience, but a deliberate, intentional cultivation of the self, rooted in principle, guided by observation, and strengthened through consistent practice. Ultimately, the old identity is left behind not through rejection of the past, but through deliberate evolution of the present. Every habit, attachment, and pattern that once defined limitation is assessed, measured, and replaced with structures that serve agency, clarity, and strategic presence. The former self fades, not through denial, but through persistent cultivation of principles and disciplined action. What remains is a self that responds rather than reacts, that influences rather than conforms, and that inhabits life deliberately rather than passively. In this continuous alignment between internal intention and external action, presence becomes influence, reflection becomes clarity, and the mind, free from the constraints of habitual compliance, achieves the resilience and control that the Stoics held as the highest form of mastery. Silence is often misunderstood, seen as absence or passivity, but in truth, it is one of the most potent instruments a mind can wield. When the world is filled with noise, opinions, expectations, urgencies that press from every direction, silence becomes the space in which clarity is cultivated. Every conversation, every interaction, every social signal carries the potential to distract or provoke. And for someone who has been exposed, stripped of certainty and security, each external voice has the capacity to influence thought, emotion, and action in
I appreciate it so much, you guys. Appreciate the light.
the ultimate arena of power,
Let's get Pablo's on the move, so let's find him.
so far as we allow it to shape our judgment. To create silence is to reclaim this power, to establish a domain where observation is unhurried and decisions are deliberate. By withdrawing from the continuous pull of external noise, you afford yourself the opportunity to see patterns in behavior, both in others and in yourself, that remain hidden amid constant stimulus. This is not retreat. It is an engagement of attention with precision. The quiet mind perceives differently. In the absence of distraction, subtle signals stand out. The hesitations, the patterns of influence, the ways in which people interact with the world and with you. When silence becomes a tool, it is simultaneously a lens and a shield. It allows the mind to reflect without distortion, to trace cause and effect in relationships, choices, and habits, and to measure the energy expended in each interaction. People who have not learned the power of quiet often overestimate the impact of speech and underestimate the force of observation. By withholding words, by not reacting immediately to every stimulus, you shift the balance. Presence becomes the communicator. Unpredictability becomes leverage. Without announcing your intentions, without seeking affirmation, the world begins to adjust around the discipline of your attention rather than around the impulses of others. This is subtle influence, the kind that does not demand acknowledgement, but still exerts undeniable effect. Silence also fosters a disciplined mind. The act of holding one's reactions, of observing emotion without immediate expression, is training in patience, self-regulation, and discernment. When stripped of distraction, the mind is able to distinguish between impulses worth acting on and those that are mere echoes of habit or expectation. Stoicism emphasizes that what lies within our control is our own reasoned response, and silence is the condition in which this response can be most deliberate. Without constant dialogue with the world, without the push and pull of validation, provocation, and opinion, the mind exercises its capacity to act from principle rather than reflex. This is not detachment in the sense of coldness or indifference, but precision in alignment. Thought, word, and action begin to cohere with intentionality, and the energy once scattered by external voices is now invested in clarity, insight, and strategy. The strategic value of silence emerges in unpredictability. People who are consistently reactive are readable, their emotions and intentions are predictable, and their patterns can be manipulated. By contrast, someone who has mastered the discipline of quiet is difficult to anticipate. When the mind is unhurried, when speech is measured, when presence is deliberate, influence arises naturally. Others begin to reveal themselves in response to silence, and their behaviors provide intelligence without prompting. This is the power of observation as leverage. By choosing not to react, you compel the world to reveal information while conserving your own energy. Each pause, each moment of unspoken attention, is a mechanism of influence. The unpredictability it produces is subtle but profound, altering how others engage with you and granting you authority that does not need to be declared. The exercise of silence also strengthens self perception. In the absence of continuous external noise, you learn to hear your own thoughts more clearly, to distinguish what is your judgment from what is expectation, to calibrate action to principle rather than impulse. The Stoics argued that the mind is always at work interpreting reality, and it is only in quiet observation that the interpretations become conscious and deliberate rather than reactive. Each internal insight becomes a guidepost for action, and the energy once spent navigating the ceaseless noise of others is redirected toward cultivating awareness, discipline, and purpose. In this state, the mind is able to identify weaknesses, discern patterns in both self and environment, and execute choices with deliberate precision. The investment in quiet returns exponentially in clarity, resilience, and influence. Furthermore, silence cultivates resilience to provocation. When you remove the compulsion to respond to every stimulus, the power of manipulation diminishes. Others may attempt to test, provoke, or unsettle, but in quiet there is resistance. Emotions are observed, measured, and engaged on deliberate terms, not dictated by external pressure. This mastery over reaction is not suppression, but command, the ability to experience fully and act selectively. Energy is preserved, focus is maintained, and influence is exerted without waste. In silence, the mind practices stoic detachment, not as indifference, but as disciplined allocation of attention, allowing the observer to navigate complexity with measured action rather than distraction. The past is not a place to linger in regret, nor a treasure chest of nostalgia to be romanticized. Every experience, every failure, every betrayal, every moment in which you felt powerless or misunderstood carries information. It is not shameful to have been misled or to have misjudged, and it is not weakness to have experienced loss or discomfort. These moments are data, raw and unaltered, offering insight into the architecture of your choices, habits, and vulnerabilities. The Stoics emphasize that understand. Have you ever met someone who walks into a room and instantly grabs attention? Not because they're loud, flashy, or trying too hard, but because there's something about them that feels effortlessly magnetic. That's silent attractiveness. It's not about being the center of attention. It's about commanding respect and admiration without saying much. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people will never have it. Why? Because they spend their lives begging for scraps of validation, burning themselves out trying to be seen, while ignoring the quiet strength that tears through the noise without making a sound. They expect you to react. They expect you to get emotional, defensive, loud, and pulled into nonsense. Your phone lights up, someone says something slick, a situation turns tense, and before you know it, your mood is hijacked. It's wild how fast peace disappears, right? 1 second you're fine, the next you're replaying an argument in your head, crafting comebacks you'll never say, burning energy on people who don't even deserve a response. The Stoics noticed this problem centuries ago, long before notifications and social media existed. They saw how easy it is to lose control when the world pokes at your emotions. And they taught something that sounds simple but changes everything. Calm is not weakness. Calm is power. If you've ever felt like your peace is easy to steal, this is your wake-up call. Not to become cold, not to become distant, but to become unshakable. Stay with me, because these 13 Stoic lessons aren't about being passive. They're about becoming mentally dangerous in the calmest way possible. If these conversations speak to something real in you, something grounded in truth, philosophy, and inner growth, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it helps us reach more minds like yours. And it quietly signals that you're walking this path with intention. Lesson 1. Don't react on cue. There's a strange moment that happens right before you lose control. It's that tiny flash of heat in your chest, that sudden rush of energy that tells you to speak now, react now, defend now. It feels urgent, like if you don't respond immediately, you'll lose something important. Respect, dignity, your chance to be understood. Most people don't even notice that moment. They just follow it. They let the impulse take the wheel and call it honesty or strength. But the Stoics noticed this moment very clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how the mind gets carried away when it isn't trained to pause, how easily we become servants to our first reaction. Stoicism doesn't tell you to feel nothing. It teaches you to notice that first emotional wave without letting it drown you. Think about the last time someone pushed your buttons. Maybe it was a careless comment, a disrespectful tone, or someone crossing a boundary you thought was clear. Your body probably reacted before your mind did. Your heart sped up, your jaw tightened, words rushed forward. That's not you being weak. That's your nervous system doing what it's always done. The problem isn't the feeling, the problem is acting on it without choice. Epictetus warned that if someone can provoke you, they gain power over you. Not because they are strong, but because your reaction hands them control of your inner world. The Stoic path is about taking back control
I'm coming out. Go.
by suppressing emotion, but by creating a small space between what happens and how you respond. That space is everything. It's where freedom lives. In that pause, you get to decide who you want to be in that moment. The person who explodes and regrets it later, or the person who stays grounded and speaks with clarity. This is where psychology meets stoicism in a powerful way. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most reactions are unconscious. They come from old habits, old wounds, old fears. When you react on cue, you're not choosing, you're repeating, and repetition without awareness slowly becomes a personality you didn't consciously build. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you react on cue, you step into someone else's frame. You're responding to their mood, their timing, their emotional state. You're no longer moving from your own values, you're moving from their pressure. Seneca wrote about how quickly we surrender our peace when we let the outside world decide our inner state. Most conflicts are not about truth, they're about emotional momentum. Someone throws energy at you and you throw it back. The cycle continues. But when you don't react immediately, the cycle breaks. The energy has nowhere to go. The moment loses its power. This doesn't mean you become passive or let people disrespect you. Stoicism is not about being silent forever. It's about choosing when your words are worth the cost. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every challenge deserves your emotional energy. When you speak from calm instead of impulse, your words carry weight. They land differently. People listen more closely when you don't speak from heat. And even when they don't listen, you walk away with your dignity intact. That's a quiet kind of strength most people never learn. Over time, something interesting happens when you stop reacting on cue. People notice, some become uncomfortable. They're used to controlling the rhythm of the interaction. They expect you to rise when they poke. When you don't, it unsettles them, not because you're intimidating, but because you're no longer predictable. You're no longer easy to manipulate emotionally. Carl Jung spoke about how projection works, how people often throw their inner chaos onto others. When you refuse to carry that chaos for them, they're forced to sit with it themselves. Your calm becomes a mirror, and mirrors can be confronting. This practice also changes how you see yourself. You start to trust your own restraint. You realize you don't need to prove yourself every moment. You don't need to win every exchange. You don't need to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The Stoics believed that inner freedom begins when your peace no longer depends on external approval. Each time you choose not to react on impulse, you strengthen that inner freedom. You're building a mind that responds with intention instead of habit. And you won't get this perfect. You'll still have moments where you react and wish you hadn't. That's part of the process. Stoicism isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself not as a flawless man, but as someone constantly practicing restraint, constantly reminding himself of the path he wanted to walk. Every time you catch yourself a little sooner, pause a little longer, and speak a little more intentionally, you're training your mind. Slowly, your reactions turn into responses, your silence turns into a choice, and your calm stops being something you wish you had and becomes something you carry with you. Lesson 2. Let silence do the talking. Most people feel uneasy the moment a conversation goes quiet. You can sense it in your body, the urge to fill the space, to say something, anything, just so the silence doesn't stretch too long. We've been trained to believe that quiet moments are awkward, that pauses mean something is wrong, that if we don't speak up, we're losing ground. But that reflex to rush into noise is often what pulls us into arguments we never needed to have, explanations that don't change anything, and emotional back and forth that leaves us drained. Stoicism teaches something different. It reminds us that you don't have to respond to every moment of tension. You don't have to fill every gap with words. Sometimes the strongest position you can take is to remain still inside yourself while the moment passes. Think about how often words become a trap. You start explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. You defend your intentions to someone who is only listening for flaws. You keep talking, hoping that clarity will suddenly appear. But the more you speak, the more tangled the situation becomes. Marcus Aurelius warned about this subtle mistake when he reflected on how easily we give our energy to what doesn't deserve it. Silence in this sense is not avoidance, it is selection. You are choosing where your attention goes. You are deciding that your inner peace is not open for every debate, every opinion, every emotional demand that comes your way. A lot of people confuse silence with weakness. They think if you don't respond immediately, you're being passive, or you're afraid, or you don't have anything to say. But Stoicism never taught silence as submission. It taught silence as discipline. Epictetus spoke about the importance of governing your own responses before trying to govern anything outside of you. When you choose not to speak right away, you're practicing that control. You're showing yourself that you are not a slave to impulse. You can feel the emotion rise, acknowledge it, and still choose not to let it drive your action. This doesn't mean you never speak up or set boundaries. Silence is not about swallowing everything and pretending it doesn't matter. It's about choosing the right moments to use your voice. There are times when words are necessary, when clarity needs to be spoken, when truth should be expressed calmly and directly. But Stoicism teaches that your words carry more weight when they are not scattered. When you don't speak out of habit or emotion, your voice becomes grounded. Your words land with intention. Seneca wrote about how wisdom often shows itself in restraint, in knowing when enough has been said and when nothing more needs to be added. That kind of restraint protects your dignity. Psychology backs this up in a quiet way. When you react instantly, your nervous system is usually in charge. You're operating from tension, not clarity. Silence interrupts that pattern. It gives your body a chance to settle. Your breathing slows, your thoughts organize. The emotion that felt urgent a moment ago often softens when you don't immediately feed it with words. Carl Jung spoke about the importance of becoming conscious of our inner reactions instead of being ruled by them. Silence gives you that small window of awareness. It lets you see your own triggers before they turn into regret. There is also a deep respect you build for yourself when you learn to sit in silence without rushing to fill it. You start to realize that you don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't have to narrate your inner world to people who are not listening with care. Stoicism reminds us that our inner life is something to be guarded, not constantly displayed. When you become selective with your words, you protect your energy. You stop leaking yourself into every moment of friction. You choose where to invest your attention, your emotion, your presence. Over time, this practice changes the way you move through conversations. You listen more. You speak less, but with more clarity. You stop performing for approval and start responding from alignment. People may not always understand your quiet. Some might even feel challenged by it. But that discomfort is not yours to fix. Your responsibility from a Stoic point of view is to remain true to your own character. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of acting in harmony with your nature, not with the shifting moods of others. Silence, when used wisely, helps you do exactly that. Eventually, you begin to feel the difference inside yourself. Conversations don't drain you the way they used to. Conflict doesn't hook into your emotions as quickly. You're able to pause, observe, and choose. That pause becomes a form of freedom. You're no longer rushing to prove yourself, defend yourself, or explain yourself in every moment. You're grounded. You're present. And when you do speak, your words come from a place of calm intention rather than emotional reflex. That is the quiet strength Stoicism points toward. Not silence as emptiness, but silence as presence. Lesson 3. Praise is a soft trap. It feels good to be noticed. Let's be honest about that. When someone tells you you did a great job, or that you're impressive, or that they admire your discipline, something in you relaxes for a moment. Your chest lifts. Your mood improves. It's a small rush of warmth that feels harmless, even healthy. There's nothing wrong with enjoying that feeling. The problem starts when you begin to need it, when the silence after the compliment feels heavy, when your motivation fades if no one is watching. The Stoics warned about this subtle shift. They understood that when your sense of worth depends on the reactions of others, your peace becomes fragile. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, not the quality of people's praise, not the number of approving voices around you. Your thoughts about yourself are the foundation. Everything else is weather." At first, the trap was quiet. You don't wake up one day desperate for approval. It sneaks in. You start doing small things differently. You phrase your words to sound more impressive. You shape your choices around what will be admired instead of what feels right. You hesitate to take the harder path if it might look less glamorous. Without noticing, your compass shifts outward. And when your direction comes from outside, you are no longer walking your own path. Stoicism pushes against this. It teaches that the only solid ground is inner approval, the quiet knowledge that you acted in line with your values, even when no one clapped. Carl Jung captured this tension when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That doesn't happen when you're performing for applause. It happens when you're listening to your own conscience instead of the crowd. Praise can slowly train you to perform instead of to live.
Thank you for the
You
like.
begin to measure your worth by reactions, likes, compliments, approval. And the moment those fade, doubt creeps in. You start wondering if you're still enough. This is where Stoicism offers a grounding reminder. You are responsible for your character, not for how it is received. Seneca once wrote, "If you wish to be loved, love." He wasn't talking about chasing admiration. He was pointing to something quieter and stronger. Live well. Act with integrity. Let your actions be honest. If praise comes, receive it calmly. If it doesn't, continue anyway. Your behavior should not rise and fall with applause. Your values should not change based on who is watching. Psychology shows us something similar. When approval becomes your fuel, your behavior becomes predictable. You start doing what earns praise instead of what builds character. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Many people don't realize how much of their life is being steered by the quiet hunger to be seen. They think they're choosing freely, but they're reacting to the possibility of approval or the fear of losing it. Once you see this pattern, you can interrupt it. You can pause and ask yourself a simple question. Would I still do this if no one noticed? That question alone can bring you back to your own center. This doesn't mean you reject compliments or pretend they don't matter. That kind of false toughness is just another performance. The Stoic way is more balanced. You accept praise with gratitude, then you let it go. You don't cling to it. You don't build your identity around it. Epictetus taught that what upsets us is not what happens, but how we interpret what happens. Praise is neutral until you turn it into proof of your worth. Criticism is neutral until you turn it into a verdict on who you are. Both are opinions. Neither defines your character. Your character is defined by what you choose to do when no one is clapping. There's also a quiet freedom that comes when you stop performing for approval. You speak more honestly. You choose more boldly. You take risks that might not look impressive but feel true. Your energy shifts from being seen to becoming. And people notice that shift, not because you're trying to impress them, but because there's a calm confidence in someone who is not negotiating with the crowd for permission to be themselves. Seneca wrote, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." Praise can be a form of prosperity. It feels good, but if you believe it defines you, its absence will feel like loss. When you stop being deceived by praise, you become steady in both admiration and silence. In daily life, this shows up in small, ordinary moments. You finish a project and no one comments. You share an idea and it doesn't get much reaction. You help someone and they don't thank you. The old pattern says, why bother next time? The Stoic response is different. You act because it's right, not because it's recognized. You keep your standards even when no one is watching. Over time, this builds something rare, self-respect, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses. The Stoic path doesn't promise applause, it promises alignment. It promises that when your values match, you feel whole, even in silence. Praise will come and go. Sometimes people will notice you, sometimes they won't. None of that changes who you are becoming. When you need to be constantly validated, you gain something far valuable. You gain the ability to move through the world being pulled by every reaction. You stop chasing mirrors and start walking your own road. And that's where real strength quietly grows. Lesson 4. Slow down when the world rushes. When everything around you feels rushed, your body reacts before your mind has a chance to catch. Messages come in fast. Deadlines stack. People want answers right now. And before you even notice what's happening, your breathing gets shallow, your thoughts start racing, and your decisions become sharp and sloppy at the same time. You've probably sent a text you later wished you could unsend, or agreed to something just to escape the pressure of the moment. This isn't because you're weak, it's because speed creates noise inside the mind. The Stoics warned that a noisy mind can't see clearly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the quality of your thoughts shapes the quality of your life. When everything feels urgent, your thoughts become crowded, and crowded thoughts lead to crowded choices. There's a strange lie the modern world tells us. Faster is better. That replying quickly means that decision instantly means confident. That moving at full speed means productive. But most of that clarity, it's anxiety dressed up as importance. The Stoics believed that calm action, rushed action every time. They trained themselves to pause before moving, to observe before acting, to create space between impulse and response. That space is where wisdom lives. When you slow down, even for a few seconds, you start to hear your own instead of the noise of the world telling you who to be and how far to be in it. Think about how many mistakes happen because things feel urgent. You jump into a conversation without understanding the full picture. You agree to a commitment you don't actually have the for. You react because you felt cornered. Then later, when the pressure fades, you see clearly. You think, I didn't need to rush that. Stoics practiced something simple but powerful. Refused to let urgency steal their judgment. Epictetus taught that it's not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. When something feels urgent, your judgment often says, this must be handled now. Slowing down lets you question that story. It gives you back the power to decide whether something truly energy or just a reaction. You can practice this in small, everyday moments. When someone has a message that feels demanding, don't reply instantly. Take one breath, then another. Let your nervous system settle before your focus touch the screen. When a decision is urgent, ask yourself a quiet question. What happens if I wait minutes? Most of the time, it falls apart. What does change is your clarity. The Stoics believed that time, even a little of it, is perspective. Seneca wrote how much of life is wasted in unnecessary hurry, and how calm attention reveals what rush hides. When you slow down, you notice detail missed. The tone of someone's voice, the hidden meaning in a the feeling in your body. This isn't right for me. There's also a deeper freedom that comes from not matching the words. When everyone is rushing, choosing feels rebellious. It feels like stepping out of a race you never agreed to run. Stoicism teaches that you your panic. You don't owe instant access to your attention. You owe yourself presence. While much of human suffering comes from being disconnected from one's inner life. Rushing disconnects you from that inner life. Slowing down brings you back into a relationship with yourself. You start to feel your own boundaries again. You sense when something costs too much. You recognize when you're being pulled by fear instead of guided by values. Notice how your body responds when you slow your pace. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your thoughts become less sharp and more clear. This isn't accidental. Your nervous system is built to calm when you choose steadiness over speed. The Stoics didn't have modern psychology, but they understood the body mind connection deeply. They knew that inner stillness creates outer wisdom. Aurelius wrote about standing firm like a rock while waves crash around it. That image is powerful because it shows what slowing down really is. You're not stopping life from happening. You're refusing to be dragged by it. This practice isn't about perfection. You will still rush sometimes. You will still get caught in urgency. That's human. The Stoic path is about noticing faster, catching yourself sooner, pausing a little longer. Each time you choose to slow down, even for a moment, you're training your mind to value clarity over chaos. You're telling yourself that your peace is not something to be traded for pressure. Over time, those small pauses become a way of living. You move through life with more presence, fewer regrets, and a deeper sense that you are not being carried by the current. You are choosing your direction. Lesson 5. Watch actions, not words. We've all been there. Someone tells you exactly what you want to hear. They sound supportive. They sound honest. They sound like they're on your side. And for a moment, you relax. You let your guard down. You assume their words mean what they sound like they mean. But then time passes and something feels off. The support doesn't show up when you need it. The promises fade when it's inconvenient. The energy changes when there's nothing for them to gain. That quiet discomfort you feel, that's your intuition noticing a gap between words and reality. The Stoics paid close attention to that gap. They knew that truth doesn't live in speeches, it lives in patterns. What someone does consistently will always tell you more than what they say once. It's easy to fall in love with language. People are good with words. They can sound sincere, thoughtful, even wise. But words are light. They move easily. Actions are heavy. They require effort. They cost something. That's why Stoicism teaches you to observe behavior calmly instead of reacting emotionally to what people promise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he didn't need to be impressed by appearances, only by character. Character is not a performance, it's what shows up when no one is watching. When someone is kind only when it benefits them, when they listen only when it's easy, when they show up only when they are praised, their behavior is already speaking. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. There's a strange freedom that comes when you stop arguing with reality. You stop waiting for people to become who they promised to be. You stop needing explanations for patterns that have already repeated themselves. You stop taking it personally when someone shows you their limits. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and a lot of that suffering comes from hoping people will act differently next time, even when they've shown us who they are many times before. Hope feels noble, but hope without evidence becomes self betrayal. Stoicism doesn't kill hope, it grounds it. It teaches you to let hope be shaped by truth, not fantasy. This lesson also changes how you see yourself. When you stop being impressed by words, you start paying attention to your own habits. You notice the gap between what you say you want and what you actually do every day. You might say you want peace, but you keep walking into drama. You might say you want growth, but you avoid the work that makes you uncomfortable. Watching actions instead of words becomes a mirror. It's not meant to shame you, it's meant to wake you up. Real change doesn't begin with motivation, it begins with honest observation. When you see your own patterns clearly, you finally have something real to work with. Carl Jung spoke about the importance of making the unconscious conscious, because what we don't see in ourselves quietly runs our lives. The same is true with others. When you don't observe behavior, you let surface words control your expectations. You end up surprised by outcomes that were actually predictable. But when you start noticing patterns, you move differently. You trust more wisely. You give your energy more selectively. You stop over investing in people who have already shown you how much they're willing to give. This isn't coldness. This is emotional maturity. There's also peace in this approach. When you accept that behavior is the clearest language people speak, you stop needing constant reassurance. You stop chasing clarity through conversations that go in circles. You don't need to decode every text message or analyze every tone. You watch what happens over time. Patterns reveal intentions, actions reveal priorities. And when someone's behavior doesn't align with your values, you don't have to attack them for it. You simply decide how close they get to your inner world. Epictetus taught that you are responsible for what is in your control, and what's in your control is how much access you give people to your time, your trust, and your emotional space. This lesson protects you from manipulation. Smooth talkers lose power over you. Big promises stop impressing you. Dramatic apologies stop resetting your expectations when nothing changes afterward. You become harder to confuse, not because you're suspicious, but because you're grounded. You no longer build your understanding of people on what they say in emotional moments. You build it on what they do when the moment has passed and no one is clapping. That's where truth lives. And here's the quiet strength in all of this. When you stop being moved by words alone, you stop being easily hurt by them too. Insults lose weight when you measure people by behavior. Flattery loses power when you care more about consistency than compliments. You don't rise or fall with every sentence someone throws at you. You stand on something steadier. Stoicism teaches that stability comes from aligning your judgment with reality, not with stories, not with hopes, with what actually is. When you see people clearly, you suffer less. When you see yourself clearly, you grow more. And when you learn to trust actions over words, your relationships become calmer, your boundaries become cleaner, and your peace becomes harder to shake. Lesson 6: accept what could go wrong. Most people don't realize how much energy they waste trying to keep life perfectly smooth. We wake up hoping nothing goes wrong, no bad news, no awkward conversations, no sudden problems. And when something does go wrong, it feels personal, like the universe singled us out. That's usually when panic kicks in. The heart speeds up. The mind starts racing through worst case scenarios. We tell ourselves, this shouldn't be happening, as if life ever promised us comfort on demand. The Stoics saw this pattern clearly. They understood that suffering isn't just about what happens to us, but about how unprepared we are when things don't go our way. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." In other words, the storm itself doesn't decide your peace. The way you meet the storm does. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the stress we feel isn't caused by the event itself. It's caused by the shock of not expecting the event. We walk through life assuming things will work out smoothly, and when they don't, it feels like the ground drops out from under us. But the Stoic mindset flips this around. Instead of pretending life will always be kind, you quietly prepare your mind for difficulty. Not in a dark, pessimistic way, in a grounded, realistic way. You remind yourself that plans fail sometimes, people disappoint sometimes, bodies get tired, systems break. And when these things happen, you don't fall apart because you already accepted that they could. Seneca captured this perfectly when he said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." So much of our pain comes from the stories we tell ourselves about how bad things will be, long before we even face them. Psychology backs this up in a powerful way. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Avoiding the possibility of pain doesn't make you stronger, it makes you fragile. When you refuse to look at what could go wrong, you become more sensitive to it when it does. But when you face discomfort in your mind first, you take away its power to shock you. You stop being surprised by life being imperfect. You start seeing challenges as part of the terrain, not as proof that something is wrong with you or your path. There's a quiet confidence that grows when you accept that setbacks are part of being alive. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How do I move through this well?" That shift changes everything. You become less dramatic with your emotions. You stop turning every problem into a personal crisis. The Stoics believed that while you cannot control what happens to you, you can always control how you interpret it. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When you train your mind to expect some resistance from life, you don't collapse the moment resistance shows up. You adapt, you adjust, you move forward. Another example, you prepare for something important, a presentation, a conversation, an opportunity. It doesn't go the way you hoped. If your mind was clinging to a perfect outcome, the disappointment hits harder. But if you accepted ahead of time that things might not go smoothly, you experience the setback without losing your balance. You learn faster, you recover quicker, you keep your dignity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. That doesn't mean external things don't hurt. It means your interpretation decides how deeply they cut into your peace. This mindset doesn't make you passive, it makes you resilient. You still work hard, you still care, you still aim high. The difference is you're no longer emotionally dependent on things going your way. You build your stability from the inside. You stop living on emotional edge, waiting for the next surprise to knock you over. Instead, you develop a calm readiness, not fear, readiness. Like carrying an umbrella when the sky looks uncertain. You're not inviting the rain, you're simply not shocked by it. There's also a strange freedom in accepting that things can go wrong. You stop wasting energy trying to control everything. You stop blaming yourself for every outcome. You realize that setbacks are not always a sign of failure. Sometimes they're just part of the process. Carl Jung spoke about this idea when he said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." What happens to you is often outside your control. Who you become in response is entirely in your hands. That's where real power lives. Over time, this practice changes how you experience life. You become less reactive, less fragile, less shaken by small disruptions. You don't spiral as easily. You don't catastrophize every problem. You start to see challenges as training, not as threats. The Stoics believed that difficulty is not an interruption of life, but a feature of it. Seneca once wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Friction isn't the enemy, it's the tool that shapes you if you let it. The goal isn't to walk around expecting disaster. The goal is to walk around knowing you can handle discomfort when it shows up. That knowledge alone changes your posture in the world. You stand differently. You speak differently. You take risks with less fear because you're no longer terrified of failure. You trust your ability to adapt, and that trust becomes your quiet armor. Life will still surprise you. People will still disappoint you. Plans will still change, but you won't be undone by it. You'll meet it with a steadier mind, a calmer heart, and the grounded confidence of someone who knows that even when things go wrong, they are still standing. Lesson 7. Hide your hunger. Most people don't realize how much energy they lose by talking about what they plan to do instead of quietly doing it. It starts small. You share an idea with a friend. You mention a goal at work. You post a plan online. And for a moment, it feels good. You feel seen. You feel supported. You feel like you've already moved forward. But that feeling can be misleading. The Stoics warned about confusing intention with action. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that it's better to live your principles than to speak about them. When you announce your goals too early, you give your mind a shortcut to feeling accomplished without having done the hard work yet. The hunger that should be pushing you forward gets softened by approval, and suddenly the fire that was meant to drive you becomes a warm, comfortable glow that makes you want to sit down instead of move. Think about how often you've told someone what you were going to change about your life. Maybe you said you were going to get disciplined, start a project, get in shape, or build something meaningful. At that moment, people nodded. Maybe they encouraged you. Maybe they gave advice, and it felt motivating. But then days passed. The work felt heavy. The excitement faded, and the plan quietly stayed a plan. This is where Stoicism cuts through the noise. The Stoics believed that real strength is quiet. It's built in private. It's proven by consistency, not announcements. There's a deep kind of dignity in moving without needing witnesses, in becoming better without needing applause. When you work in silence, you protect your focus. You don't have to perform your progress, you just build it. There's also something psychological happening when you talk too much about your goals. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you announce your hunger for success, recognition, or change, you may not realize that part of you is craving validation more than transformation. That craving can quietly start steering your decisions. You begin to measure your progress by how people react instead of by how much you've actually grown. Your actions become shaped by expectations. You start moving in ways that look impressive rather than in ways that are true. And over time, you can lose touch with why you wanted to change in the first place. The Stoic path is different. It teaches you to anchor your motivation inside yourself, to do the work because it aligns with your values, not because it earns praise. Seneca wrote that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, and that applies here too. We imagine how good it will feel when people see our success, when they notice our progress, when they finally understand our ambition. But that imagined future can distract us from the present work that actually creates it. When your hunger becomes something you need others to recognize, you hand them power over your momentum. Your discipline starts depending on their attention, and attention is unstable. Some days you get it, some days you don't. Your growth shouldn't rise and fall with that. This doesn't mean you should never share your dreams or never ask for support. It means you become selective. You choose a few people who genuinely want to see you grow, not people who just enjoy the idea of your growth. You stop feeding your hunger to every room you walk into. You protect it. You let it burn quietly. There's a difference between sharing your vision and performing your ambition. One comes from clarity, the other comes from craving. Stoicism invites you to notice that difference in yourself without judgment, just with honesty. Over time, something shifts when you move like this. You stop needing to convince people of who you're becoming. You let them discover it. You stop feeling rushed to show progress. You trust the process of building. And when results finally appear, they feel solid because they were shaped in silence. Carl Jung also said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Becoming who you truly are rarely happens in public. It happens in quiet moments of discipline, in private choices, in small acts of integrity that no one applauds. When you hide your hunger, you're not hiding from the world. You're protecting your fire long enough for it to become something real. Lesson 8. Don't chase instant justice. There's a moment that hits almost everyone at some point. Someone says something out of pocket, disrespects you, cross a line, and before you even finish processing what just happened, your body is already heating up. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, your mind starts lining up the perfect comeback. It feels automatic, like you don't even get a choice. 1 second you're calm, the next second you're ready to fire back. Most of us have been taught that this reaction is strength, that if you don't respond immediately, you're letting people walk all over you. But here's the quiet truth the Stoics understood long ago. Reacting on impulse doesn't protect your dignity, it hands it away. Marcus Aurelius warned that when we let anger lead, we become slaves to whatever provoked us. Think about that for a second. The person who insulted you gets to decide your mood. The situation you didn't choose gets to decide your energy. You might feel powerful in the moment when you snap back, but later, when the dust settles, how often do you wish you had handled it differently? That regret is your signal. It's showing you that instant reactions don't bring peace. They bring a short burst of satisfaction followed by a long tail of frustration. Stoicism isn't telling you to swallow everything or to become passive. It's teaching you that true strength is the ability to pause before you act. That pause is where your freedom lives. Picture this. Someone throws a verbal jab at you in a meeting, a group chat, or a family gathering. The old version of you jumps in immediately, voice rising, heart racing, words flying out half formed. The newer version of you feels the same heat, but does something different. You breathe, you let the moment pass. You don't surrender your ground, you simply refuse to rush. This isn't a weakness, this is discipline. Seneca once wrote that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Delay gives you distance, distance gives you clarity, and clarity gives you control over how you show up. The argument doesn't disappear, but your power in the situation grows. A lot of people confuse not reacting right away with letting things go forever. That's not what this is. Stoicism doesn't teach you to become a doormat. It teaches you to choose your timing. Some conversations need to happen, some boundaries need to be set. But they land better when your nervous system is calm and your words are chosen, not thrown. When you wait, you stop fighting to win the moment and start acting to protect your long term peace. You can still address the issue later, but now you're doing it with intention instead of emotion. The difference is massive. One builds respect, the other builds regret. This practice also rewires how you experience conflict internally. When you chase instant justice, your mind stays stuck in the moment. You replay the words, you imagine better comebacks, you carry the tension with you into the next hour of your day. When you delay, you give your nervous system time to settle. You stop feeding the loop. Over time, this trains your mind to stay steadier under pressure. Carl Jung spoke about the importance of becoming conscious of our reactions instead of being driven by them unconsciously. When you pause before responding, you're practicing that awareness in real time. You're turning a reflex into a choice. There's also a deeper layer here that the Stoics cared about: dignity. When you react in anger, you often say things you don't fully mean. You lower your standards just to win the moment. And even if you win the exchange, something inside you knows you lost a bit of your composure. That inner discomfort isn't weakness, it's your values reminding you who you want to be. Stoicism is about aligning your actions with your principles, even when you're provoked, especially when you're provoked, because it's easy to be calm when nothing is happening. The real test of character is how you behave when something hits a nerve. The goal here isn't to suppress what you feel. Suppression builds pressure. The goal is to feel fully and act wisely. Let the anger pass through you without letting it take the wheel. Notice it, name it, then decide what, if anything, needs to be done. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That doesn't mean you ignore harm. It means you don't become the thing you're reacting against. You don't let someone else's lack of control become your own. That's a quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to shout to prove itself. Over time, something shifts when you stop chasing instant justice. You become less reactive, less brittle, more grounded. You stop needing every moment to resolve right now. You start trusting your ability to handle things with patience, and people notice it. They feel the difference in how you show up. You become someone who can sit in tension without exploding, someone who can address conflict without turning it into a war. That's not passivity, that's emotional leadership. It's stoicism in action. And the more you practice it, the more you realize that waiting is not losing. Waiting is choosing yourself. Lesson 9. Budget your emotional energy. Most people don't realize how tired they really are until they stop moving for a moment. Not physically tired, emotionally drained. You wake up with plans, maybe even good intentions, and by midday you feel heavy for no clear reason. Nothing big happened, yet your mood is off. Your focus is scattered, and your patience is thin. That's usually not because life hit you with something massive. It's because you've been leaking energy in small, invisible ways all day long. A comment that stuck in your head, a tone that annoyed you, a situation you replayed again and again, wishing you had said something different. These little moments seem harmless, but together they quietly drain you. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew the mind is like a vessel, and if you keep poking holes in it with unnecessary reactions, you end the day empty. We often treat emotional reactions as if they are free, as if getting annoyed, offended, or pulled into drama costs nothing. But every reaction has a price. It costs attention, it costs calm, it costs presence. You might spend 10 minutes arguing in your head with someone who isn't even there. You might carry frustration from one room into the next, letting it color conversations that had nothing to do with the original problem. Over time, this becomes a habit, and habits shape your inner life. Epictetus warned that any person capable of angering you becomes your master. Think about that for a second. The moment someone else controls your emotional state, they control your day. Stoicism doesn't tell you to feel nothing. It teaches you to choose where your feelings go. That choice is the beginning of freedom. Imagine your emotional energy like money in a wallet. You wake up with a certain amount each day. You don't see the number, but you feel it when it's gone. Every small irritation is a withdrawal. Every unnecessary argument is another payment. Every time you replay something you cannot change, you're spending more. And by the evening, you're wondering why you have nothing left for the people and things that actually matter to you. This is why Stoicism places so much emphasis on judgment, not judging others, but judging what deserves your inner attention. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that most things people get upset about are not worth the disturbance of the soul. That doesn't mean the situation isn't real. It means your peace is more valuable than winning every emotional battle. Psychology backs this up in a modern way. The mind tends to cling to unresolved emotional moments. We replay them trying to find closure or control. But most of the time, there is no closure to find. The event already happened, the person already spoke, the situation has already passed. The only thing still happening is the story you're telling yourself about it. Carl Jung spoke about how much of our suffering comes from unconscious patterns running the show. When you start noticing how often you replay small emotional hits, you begin to bring that pattern into awareness. And awareness gives you choice. You can say, I see what my mind is doing. I don't have to follow it. Budgeting your emotional energy doesn't mean you become detached from life. It means you become selective. You still care. You just care on purpose. You give your emotional attention to your growth, your values, your relationships that nourish you. You stop donating it to random moments of irritation. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how the mind should be a fortress, not a playground for every passing impulse. A fortress isn't cold, it's stable, it has gates, you decide what enters. This is not about building walls around your heart, it's about building boundaries around your attention. There will be moments when you catch yourself reacting anyway. You'll get pulled into a mood. You'll spend energy where you didn't mean to. That's part of practice. Stoicism is not perfection, it's training. Each time you notice the drain, you get a little better at catching it earlier next time. You pause sooner. You breathe sooner. You let go sooner. Over time, those small pauses become space. That space becomes calm. And that calm becomes a kind of quiet strength people can feel around you. There is also something deeply respectful about budgeting your emotional energy. It's a form of self respect. You're saying to yourself, My inner world matters. You wouldn't give your time to every stranger who demands it. So why give your peace to every passing irritation? Seneca wrote that life is long enough if you know how to use it. The same is true of your emotional life. You have enough energy if you don't waste it on things that cannot grow you. When you protect your inner resources, you show up more fully for what actually matters. You become more present, more patient, more grounded. Over time, this changes how you move through the world. Conversations feel lighter. Conflicts don't cling to you the same way. You stop needing to prove yourself in every moment. You start choosing your emotional investments with care. The people who try to pull you into chaos feel less powerful around you, not because you dominate them, but because you're no longer available for their noise. That is stoicism in everyday life. Not dramatic, not flashy, just quietly choosing where your inner wealth goes. That choice, repeated daily, builds a calm that doesn't depend on the world behaving nicely. Lesson 10. Calm isn't numb, it's mastery. Most people think calm means you don't feel much. They see someone quiet in the middle of tension and assume there's nothing going on inside. But that's usually the opposite of what's happening. Real calm is loud on the inside and steady on the outside. It's the moment when your heart speeds up, your chest tightens, your thoughts start racing, and you still choose not to let any of that drive your next move. That choice is the difference between being ruled by emotion and guiding it. Stoicism never asked you to become numb, it asked you to become aware. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that you have power over your mind, not outside events. That single idea changes how you move through every hard moment in your life. There's a lie we grow up with that says strong people don't feel as much. That lie creates people who bottle things up until they explode, or who shut down and call it being mature. But suppression isn't strength, it's delay. The Stoics didn't teach suppression, they taught mastery. Mastery means you notice what you feel, you allow it to exist, and then you decide what to do with it. Carl Jung put it simply when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you bring your darker emotions into awareness, anger, jealousy, fear, shame, they stop owning you in secret. They come into the light where you can work with them instead of being pushed around by them. Think about how most reactions happen. Someone says something sharp. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your tone changes. Your jaw tightens. You feel the urge to defend yourself or fire back. That reaction feels automatic, but it's not uncontrollable. There's a tiny space between what happens to you and how you respond. That space is where Stoicism lives. Epictetus taught that it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In that small pause, you get to question your first story. Is this actually an attack? Is this worth my energy? Do I want to be proud of how I respond to this later tonight when I'm alone with my thoughts? That pause is short, but it's powerful. Real calm doesn't mean you never get angry or hurt. It means you don't let those feelings choose your behavior. You can feel disappointed and still speak with respect. You can feel frustrated and still choose patience. You can feel afraid and still take the next right step. Stoicism is practical like that. It meets you in traffic jams, in tense conversations, in moments when your plans fall apart. Marcus Aurelius wrote about reminding himself again and again that he would meet difficult people and difficult moments each day, not to complain about them, but to prepare his mind for how he wanted to show up. Calm isn't a personality trait, it's a practice. Like any practice, you get better at it by doing it badly at first and then learning from it. This kind of calm also changes your relationship with pain. Pain still shows up, loss still hurts, disappointment still stings. Stoicism doesn't pretend otherwise. What changes is how long you let pain dictate your behavior. Seneca wrote that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. When you sit with pain instead of panicking about it, you realize it's uncomfortable, but it's survivable. You can carry it without letting it spill onto everyone around you. You can hold grief without turning it into bitterness. You can feel anger without turning it into cruelty. That's not numbness. That's emotional strength with a spine. There's a daily, almost boring side to this kind of mastery that no one talks about. It's built in small moments. Choosing not to send the message you'll regret. Taking a breath before you speak. Letting someone else have the last word because your peace matters more than winning the moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That line isn't about moral superiority, it's about freedom. When you stop letting other people's behavior shape your character, you take your life back into your own hands. The deepest form of calm isn't silence on the outside, it's stable on the inside. It's knowing who you are, even when emotions try to pull you away from yourself. Carl Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. That doesn't happen through loud reactions or emotional shutdown. It happens through learning how to sit with what you feel without becoming it. Stoicism gives you a map for that work. Not a perfect map, not an easy one, but a practical one. You learn to notice, you learn to pause, you learn to choose. Over time, those small choices stack up into a different way of living. If you take one thing with you today, let it be this. You don't have to win every moment to win your life. Every time you choose calm over chaos, clarity over impulse, and discipline over drama, you're shaping the person you're becoming. That quiet choice, made again and again, builds a mind the world can't easily shake. If this spoke to something real in you, don't let the momentum fade here. Watch one of the videos on your screen next and keep strengthening your mind, one insight at a time. Thank you for being part of Cycresto Mind.
Guys. Yeah, urgent though. What are y'all doing? Oh, no. Hey.
Oh, does it? I have a nice. Jared! Jared! No, I'm going to my room. You're a psychopath. Jeez, you have to clean my bed. It's literally not that much. Alright. You don't need this toy. She also needs food. Then you'll never catch me.
Wait for him.
No, but I think I was making a valid point that you literally caused the issue